Growing up on Martin Street, my sister and I have detailed accounts of events that only we can recall. But strangely, not our parents. They always dismissed our claims as specious, even humorous. Our family was religious. We attended Mass every Sunday, and for a time I even went to daily Mass at St. Agatha's Church. Our house was a mid-century 5-bedroom home with 4 bathrooms, a den in the basement, and a conservatory. The backyard stretched out with a large side yard and an orchard. Up the dirt path stood an old white house with a bell tower. It looked abandoned. The lawn was overgrown. A few gravestones, broken and knocked over, sat in the front yard. The owner once told us that the previous resident practiced making gravestones as a hobby. But the strangest things always happened in what we called the Red Room. Our grandfather visited us one day, and in the middle of the night he suddenly went mad. He walked out of the house. The police found him the next day, suffering from the elements, and took him to the hospital. A few days later he came home, and he died, in the Red Room. Each of the 4 upstairs bedrooms had a color. The west rooms were green. The east rooms were red. My sister was unfortunate enough to stay in the room next to the one where our grandfather had died. We believed it was haunted. She stayed there, throughout her entire adolescence. A few weeks after his passing, our aunt stayed in the Red Room. One night, I saw her kneeling by the bed, clutching a rosary, praying, looking up at the crucifix above the bed, the one decorated with palm leaves from Good Friday. The next morning, I overheard her complaining to my father in the kitchen. She said she had a dream. An evil presence visited her. A figure appeared in robes, like Christ himself. But instead of blessing her, it tried to strangle her, in her sleep. She screamed. She woke. And she told my father she knew it wasn't Christ, because there was no divine glow. She believed it was a demonic spirit, in disguise. Shortly after, I saw her white Cadillac pull out of our driveway. Years later, my father's business partner and his son stayed in the same room. The son was about my age. When I told him about the incidents with my grandfather, and with our aunt, he refused to sleep in the room after just one night. Once, he even stayed outside on the porch, refusing to enter the house until we all came home from a family outing. Amused, my father told me, with levity, that I was a great actor. But it wasn't just the Red Room. The rest of the house carried its own shadows, especially the living room and the conservatory at night. When cleaning after dark, the sound of the vacuum drowned out everything else. It left me deaf to the house, and yet, I always felt someone was walking toward me. The same uneasy feeling came when I practiced piano or violin. I would play a piece, hear footsteps, or the creak of the floor, stop, and then resume, trying to ignore my fear. Even during the day, the feeling persisted. One day, while drinking tea in the kitchen, I told my sister about this odd sensation of being watched. As I spoke, something white and translucent floated up the stairs. We both saw it. At the same time, we knew we weren't hallucinating. She confessed that she too had felt it while taking a bath in our mother's bathroom, that same feeling of something watching and approaching. I also had a recurring dream. In it, I was alone. At night, sitting in the dining room. The dining room lights would start to dim. I would run to the dimmer switch, trying to turn the lights back up, but they would only dim further. Not just in the dining room, throughout the entire house. The conservatory next to the living room was a room of windows on every wall. Even the walls facing into the living and dining rooms were glass. We always kept the drapes drawn. If the conservatory lights were off, you couldn't see out into that black room. And if someone were inside, they could peer in at you. As children, we once played a game with our cousins called Haunted House. They drew silly pictures of monsters and decorated the conservatory. My sister and I waited in the living room until we heard a voice, one that sounded just like our cousin's, calling us in. The conservatory was pitch black, except for faint light spilling in through the windows. We rolled open the heavy metal and glass door and stepped inside. The room was empty. No drawings, No cousins? Feeling uneasy. We left the room and closed the door. Minutes later, we heard our cousins complaining that we were taking too long to enter. When we opened the door again, the lights inside were dim. The monster drawings were there. Our cousins were there. The room was completely different from what we had just seen. There was nowhere to hide inside the conservatory. And our cousins weren't outside. They had removed their shoes at the front door, as was our custom. They weren't sophisticated enough to play such a prank. My sister and I concluded that, for a brief moment, we had entered another dimension. Till this day, we still do not know whose voice, so much like our cousins, called us in to that room.